in a town where everyone knew everyone and thought they knew everything. An old man sat by a diner window, alone, silent, forgotten, no uniform, no medals, just a faded tattoo barely visible beneath a rolled sleeve. They said he was nobody. They whispered he never served. They laughed loud enough to wound. But what they didn't know was that this quiet man once moved through fire to save others, and carried a promise so heavy it stayed with him for 50 years. This is not a war story. This is a story about what happens after the war, about silence, about shame, about grace, and how one Sunday morning the entire town found itself face to face with a legend it never knew it had. Because sometimes history walks past us wearing old jeans, holding nothing but a coffee cup and everything we need to remember. It all began on Veterans Day with an empty booth, a cruel laugh, and a young soldier who recognized a tattoo no one else understood. The diner had that Sunday morning quiet, the kind that hums just below the clink of forks on ceramic. Outside, the wind tickled the windows. Inside, bacon sizzled and old country tunes spilled from the jukebox that hadn't been updated since Reagan was president. But in one corner, by the exit sign and beneath a flickering light, sat a man who made the air feel heavier. Walter Reed. He didn't wear medals, no ball cap, no loud stories or toasts to the past. He just sat quiet, weathered, alone. What caught the eye wasn't just his limp or the dull metal of a prosthetic leg peeking beneath frayed jeans. It was the tattoo. A dagger crossed through an anchor, faded, worn thin with time. The kind of mark you'd miss unless you knew exactly what it meant. 4 men in the center booth didn't miss it, matching golf jackets, laughs sharper than their tongues. Probably drew that on himself. One chuckled. No vet sits alone without a badge. Another scoffed. Their voices weren't loud, but loud enough. Walter didn't react, not even a glance. His hand trembled slightly around his coffee cup, the same way I'd seen combat medics grip gauze when the bleeding wouldn't stop. He was still, like he'd had this moment before, too many times. Then the manager came, clipboard under one arm, fake smile under his mustache. "Sir," he said with corporate courtesy, "we've had a few complaints. Some guests feel uncomfortable. Would you mind sitting outside?" Walter didn't argue. He didn't protest. Just nodded, not in agreement, in resignation. He stood, balancing the tray in one hand, cane in the other, and what little dignity he had left in between. As he walked past the center table, one of the men lifted his coffee mug and smirked. "If he's a SEAL, I must be the president." Laughter echoed, and that's when I saw it, a tear, not a sob, not a breakdown. Just a single tear that fell quietly onto the tiled floor. He made it outside, settled at the far end of the patio, wind brushing against his shoulders. Cold eggs, hot shame, quiet pain. But then, the bell above the diner door chimed, and everything changed. He stood tall, early 30s, high-end tight haircut, black jacket zipped to the collar, military sharp. His name, Jackson Miles. Eyes like a storm held in check, boots silent against tile. He scanned the room, then locked onto the patio window. He saw the tattoo, faded, real, familiar. He stopped mid-step, breath caught in his throat, and time for a moment froze. "Sir, Are you Walter Reed of SEAL Team Bravo? The old man looked up slowly, confused. Wind lifted the edge of his coat. The full tattoo was revealed. Jackson swallowed hard. His voice cracked. G7, isn't it, sir? You're the one they tell us about in training. Walter blinked. His mouth opened, but no words came. His hand gripped the cane tighter, and then, finally, a nod. Jackson remained standing, back straight, arm raised in salute. He didn't sit until Walter motioned for him to. Inside, no one moved. Even the coffee machine seemed to hold its breath. The mockers, pale, silent, and I was frozen, because my grandfather, James Harrington, had whispered the name Walter Reed to me as a child like it was myth, a legend that walked among ghosts. And now he was sitting in the cold with a young SEAL saluting him. Jackson reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded envelope, set it gently on the table. My father, Thomas Miles. He served in Laos. He wrote this for you. Never got the chance to send it. Walter's hands trembled as he opened the letter. His lips moved without sound. And then the tears came, not just for the letter, but for the decades in between. It was 1971. Laos. Operation Swift Current. 3 soldiers trapped in a burning transport truck, screaming for help. And then a shadow appeared, small frame, calm eyes. Walter, he didn't yell, he didn't wait. He just moved, dragged them out one by one. Through gunfire, through fire. One man had no name. One was Corporal Thomas Miles. And Walter, quiet as ever, disappeared before they could thank him. Walter held the letter like it was alive, eyes shut. A breath held for 50 years finally released. No speech, no headline, just grief, gratitude, and grace. That week, everything changed. The manager, Todd, brought Walter a hot cocoa, said he'd been a supply clerk in Vietnam. Never had the guts to admit it. I never saw a firefight, but you made sure we all got home. I'm sorry for making you sit outside. And then the others came. Old vets, young soldiers. They didn't bring medals. They brought hands outstretched and tears. Walter's auto shop, once nearly abandoned, came alive. Teens repainted the fence. Veterans donated tools. Kids brought crayon drawings of a man with a tattoo. And Walter smiled. Not wide. Not often, but real. Letters began arriving. Hundreds from widows, grandchildren, men who never forgot. One read, "Dear Mr. Reed, you pulled my father from a jungle in 1971. He didn't talk much, but he always remembered you. Thank you. Alan Morris, son of L.T. David Morris." Another from a mother. "You stayed with my boy when no one else could. Even if he didn't make it, he wasn't alone. And for that, I love you like a son." And the tattoo, that dagger and anchor, it became more than ink. It became a symbol of sacrifice, of silence, of stories almost lost. You see, some heroes don't wear capes. They carry wrenches. Or coffee cups. They limp instead of march, cry when no one's looking. They don't ask for anything. They just show up again and again until we finally notice. But Walter's story wasn't done. Because just when the world started to remember, they gave him a microphone. And for the first time in half a century, Walter Reed, the man who never spoke, stood in front of an entire town and said just a few quiet words that would echo for generations. It happened on a Thursday. The sun rose gently over the hills of Miller's Point, casting a soft, amber glow on the sidewalk outside the diner where Walter used to sit. The flag out front hung still in the windless dawn. At 7:02 a.m. the call came. Walter Reed, 85 years old, had passed away in his sleep. No sirens, no final words, just silence, like always. The town moved in unison like something sacred had shifted. The diner closed early. The auto shop's lights stayed off. School buses paused outside the post office where Walter used to mail handwritten notes. And at the edge of town, under a sky too blue for morning, a crowd gathered. No floral arrangements, no brass band, no slideshow with dramatic music, just a wooden casket draped in the American flag. A man in a flannel shirt stood at the front with a folded photo, faded from time, creased at the corners, showing two men in jungle fatigues, laughing beside a rusted truck. One of them was my grandfather, the other was Walter. There were no speeches, only silence. And silence in that moment said more than words ever could. 6 men stepped forward in formation. Navy SEALs, clean uniforms, polished boots. The youngest was barely 23. The oldest had gray at his temples and scars across his knuckles. They lifted Walter's casket with the kind of reverence you reserve for saints, or legends no one dared to call legend. Not because he asked for it, but because when a man like Walter goes home, you show up. The burial site was modest. No marble angels. Just a small plaque with his name, the years of his life, and a single line beneath. He kept the promise. After the service, no one rushed to leave. People lingered. A young boy, maybe 10, left a crayon drawing of Walter handing someone a cup of coffee. Beside it, someone laid down a single daisy wrapped in a napkin. Written in blue ink, "We see you now." I stayed behind. Everyone else had gone, just me and the wind. I sat near the headstone, holding the photo my grandfather had kept in his field journal, the one Walter later signed, shaky and slow. I looked at it, really looked. Not because Walter had gone viral, not because news crews came and left, but because of what he left behind without ever trying to. You know, we always thought the medals were what made a soldier a hero. The citations, the speeches, the salutes, but Walter, he never had a stage. He had a wrench, a cane, a cup of black coffee, and a heart that kept showing up long after the war ended. He didn't save lives so people would remember his name. He did it because someone had to, because a promise once made even in the jungle still matters, even if no one remembers. Especially then. 3 weeks after the funeral, the town held a small ceremony. They planted a tree in front of the auto shop. No ribbon cutting. Just a boy reading a poem he wrote called "The Man with the Tattoo." And beside the tree a plaque, "For Walter Reed, who lived quietly so others could live loudly." The most remarkable thing, Walter never once asked to be seen, but in seeing him we learned to see each other. Charlotte, the waitress who once poured him coffee, now runs the diner. Every Sunday, veterans eat for free. The back booth is reserved, not because Walter might return, but because his silence still fills the space. I still carry that photo in my wallet, not because Walter became famous, but because he taught me something no headline ever could. Kindness doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to show up. We once believed medals were the highest honor, until we met the man who had none. Walter showed us that true glory is keeping a promise, even when no one remembers your name. But sometimes the quiet ones leave echoes louder than any parade. And in the smallest places, a diner booth, an old garage, a folded letter, their stories wait patiently, hoping someone will finally listen. Walter Reed never asked to be remembered. He didn't seek a statue, a plaque, or applause. He just wanted his coffee hot, and his promises kept. But somehow, through quiet acts and quiet pain, he reminded all of us that some missions never end, and some heroes never stop serving. So if you see someone sitting alone, someone with worn hands, tired eyes, and a story they don't tell, maybe pull up a chair, ask their name, say thank you. Because one day, you might realize you've been sitting next to a man who once carried others through fire, and never once asked you to notice. If this story moved you, leave a comment below, not for the algorithm, but for the quiet heroes in your life. Share their names, share their stories, because silence is powerful. But remembrance, that's how we keep their legacy alive. And maybe, just maybe, the next time someone says, he was just an old man with a tattoo, you'll know better. You'll know the truth.